being quite stunned and talking to somebody who was a child in the 1940s, 50s, saying about the fact that they were given a lot of opportunities. This is a male child in the UK, but also an incredible obligation that the future of the society's survival rested on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And the notion of default came up at a point in the future, because did they actually want to fulfill that requirement? And I suppose it links to the fact that how long do you think this icon can survive as an abstract notion with reality hinging on it? Or is that sort of, you end up with this tension?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this campaign is pretty new, but the speed at which it's kind of proliferating is incredible. So it's 2008 is when it kind of kicks off, and it's just like wildfire. And so there are people, I know there's a graduate student at my institution who's been doing ethnography of the girl effect in Uganda in one of these projects. And so that kind of question of the kind of pushback from the on-the-ground agencies who are, sometimes getting this fund and appropriating them and doing other things with them, but then having to be answerable, and also the girls and so these are the kinds of questions she's looking at ethnographically. And this particular study, though, interesting, so it's Uganda, is about promoting girls to be physically active as one of the, for their sports, as one of the kind of, correlations towards better futures. But it's like a bizarre point to pick, right, in the actual context. So, I think that is a kind of open question in terms of what's the response. On the other hand, I think people are just, who've been laboring in development, trying to get money for projects, can be delighted to get some money flowing. There's a lot of, I think Plan has a more complicated history, but then, it's complicated in lots of ways. You can talk about how Plan works, but so there are, it on the ground, it has another, we have to do another map of the kind of couple of these entanglements, hopes, and aspirations, and how they work.
Tobie, you talked about design being characterized usually as putting things together, and then you say that speculative design is a methodology that opens things up. I'm just wondering whether other kinds of design, other than speculative design, do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I presented there is just a reflection on the sorts of practices that I've been doing, and started to call in. Others, I think, also use the term speculative design. But yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, this is just a very kind of particular bit of work. And I was thinking also that speculative design could also take place in different territories. It needn't be something necessarily that's about, public engagement of science and technology, for example. So I think, what you say is true. It could, other things could perhaps have the same effect, and also it could travel into different spaces as well and do something similar there. So yeah, it's just a kind of snapshot of a very particular set of work, I guess. Did that go?
That's a follow-up question. But if we take as central to design practices the idea of prototyping, exploratory, etc., then is not all design speculative? So if we name some particular practices as speculative, what is it that's more speculative or differently speculative about them as opposed to other design practices which are then not labelled speculative? What's that word speculative doing for design?
Well, I guess,
kinds of design.
Yeah, I mean, I guess here the point is that is really attending to what's being done and being very careful about how you talk about, the claims that you're making. Because I mean, I guess one of the points I was trying to make is that design often says it does things in quite broad ways, but then it's also very interesting to go back and really just talk about exactly how it's doing that, or to what extent it's doing that, or if it's even doing that. So I guess what I've been showing here is there's a kind of reflexivity, or just to kind of provide a broader account of the practice. And for sure, design can do that, many forms of design can do that, but often what gets taken forward, I guess, is the finished outcome, or the persuasiveness of the outcome.
Again, just following up on that, I'm wondering about this boundary between speculative design as you envisioned it, and design as it's generally practiced. And if I was thinking about a campaign like the campaign for iPod, and the whole Apple thing different. But the iPod product in particular, and the way it was marketed, which was, as I recall, silhouettes moving to something and you don't know what. To what degree did that enterprise match up with your notion of speculative design? Or is it ruled out by the fact that there was a real product and a vast amount of money was made?
Well, I guess one of the things that we're trying to think about here is this, distinction or blurring of this, on one hand, anticipation, on the other hand, speculation. And I guess it might be more, you might think of what you just described as a form of anticipation, in that it kind of embeds or in scripture very explicitly a set of behaviours or expectations. So whereas I've been trying, I guess, to set up speculation as something, not always of course, but something which tries to open things out more, or is more kind of detailed in how it presents material. So I guess the campaign that you said is moving towards something which is more anticipatory,
Can I respond to that? Because that campaign, think differently, but it's not, it's selling a commodity that we all own. So the kind of hitching together, right, of these kind of aspirations of doing things otherwise with actual business as usual is a kind of interesting point. It's not that it only does business as usual, but the hitching together of the otherwise and the business as usual, I think is the thing to attend to. And in terms of in terms of also this conversation between anticipation and speculative design, it's interesting because I think in science and technology studies, when people talk about speculation, it's almost always to critique it, because speculation as a term is so saturated with finance capital logic as a kind of term in the larger culture. Even though it has a kind of previous history, right, and logically in terms of thinking about, just thought processes, right? And so again, that's another example of these kinds of things we really care about being hitched together in these complicit ways, and just, thinking that through. And both speculation and anticipation have that kind of forward thrust to them. And so, it's interesting to think about, well, what are some imaginaries that can move in other directions that name the kind of attentiveness we're discussing, but don't necessarily have to, do it in this kind of forward thrust way. That's not to say that forward thrust is all bad, but just that it's so pervasive and we don't stop and I think enough to think about what this kind of anticipatory future orientation aspirational mode does.
1, 2, 3, then
So it seems, I'm just going to respond to this, I think there's a way to shift from anticipation to some notion of kind of just slippage, which is that, so to step back a little bit, being an outsider to design and social science, I kind of see something common to both in that they both engage with the world in terms of seeing it as a web of interconnections where you can highlight and filter out those connections selectively and very consciously. And I think what's interesting in your talk, you sort of showed how design is used to hide a bunch of those connections to come up with a very streamlined, stereotypical view, sort of this vocabulary that allows you to attach all sorts of meanings to things that individually people are projecting onto something that isn't there. And then Tobie talked about how sort of speculative design can then expose up those connections again and then start that discussion around those connections. So it seems to me there's something around slippage, which is the ability for a term or an icon or whatever to both go sort of empty of meaning and then have people project onto it and then have it sort of populated with meaning through some speculative design to then expose those links again to sort of have a discussion around that process of really filtering in and out those connections. And it seems that's something that social science and design both really actively engage in their practice, is really that process of making very conscious decisions about where you're going to talk about those connections and where you're going to say, right, we're not dealing with that.
Questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I wanted to go back to something that you said right in the beginning, Michelle, about anticipation also making the past a place for new exploration. And the thing that brings both bodies of work together for me is that design is very much about looking at what's come before and what can we build off of what we know based on what's failed in the past, so that the next iteration is going to be better and the iteration after that will be better. And you know, we anticipate this, if not linear, but certainly forward-moving progress. And that's exactly what we see in the Girl Effect campaign. And that's exactly, I think, one of the reasons that it itself has stuck so much. My 13-year-old is in a club where every Wednesday they get together and make microloans to people through. It's a, you know, it's
It attaches aspirations of
it
young
does,
girls.
and they're very clearly articulating, you know, the males in these countries have had their chance, and we've seen what they've done, and you know, now it's time to empower the girls and women in particular, and particularly entrepreneurs who have real good plans that they've put aside. So you know, it's again that process of let's look in the past in a new way. Let's come up with a new design, a new way of envisioning how we move forward from here and what we can do. So it's very much of the success of these things are very much about there is no think differently without acknowledging how we've been thinking in the past, right? Whether it's a big, you know, load of malarkey that we're getting or not, but you know, always thinking about the future from a position in the past, or a position that's re-looking at the past. I like how both bodies tap into that very much.
Probably following on from that, I wonder if there's a geopolitical element which is worth talking about as well, because I struck in the discussed in the Girl Effect video the notion of the girl in the village, and you know, what village that is and where that is. And so on.
Anywhere.
Yeah, and I was at 100% Design yesterday, which is this big sort of trade fair for furniture at Earls Court, and I was struck by the Austria had their stand, and their slogan was Austria at the edge of design. So you know, is design always then going to be sort of, you know, geographically at the edge, and you know, is that the same location where the entrepreneurship happens and where the slogan capital fits?
Can I suggest that we break for coffee now, and some of these points we can take up in the discussion session at the end. I just want to sort of find a little comment on that, which is in some ways pulling those things together, which is a lot of the government is grounded on this sort of assumed economic basis. Can you come on think of doing speculative design in relation to economics? What do it has been done in relation to science and technology? I'm not aware of it being done in relation to economics, and what would that look like? So,